Welcome to our continuing journey toward Easter. So far in our journey, we've watched on Sunday as Jesus entered into Jerusalem to the praise of the crowds. And then on Monday, as he entered the temple, we saw that he was angered by the things that he saw and threw out the money changers and the merchants. As a result, Mark tells us that the chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him. On the next day of his final week, he returns to the temple. And when he does, the religious leaders are ready for him. And they challenge him, wanting to know who it was that gave him the authority to do the things that he's doing. And that leads to a conversation, or more accurately, a stalemate between the two sides. Jesus breaks that stalemate in Mark chapter 12 by sharing the parable of the tenants, which is basically a condemnation of the religious leaders. And at the end of that parable, we read this, that the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. This conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders has been brewing since the earliest days of Jesus' ministry. But now at this point in the Gospel of Mark, it is escalating, and it's escalating quickly. And the issue at the core of this conflict is the issue of authority. The religious leaders claimed that they had authority from God. So when Jesus comes along claiming to have an authority from God that trumped even theirs, they saw that as a threat, and they rejected his claim. As we walk through this Easter story, this issue of Jesus' authority is going to come up over and over again, and it's an issue that we cannot ignore. One way or another, we must all, just like those religious leaders, come to terms with his claim. And that's exactly what we want to talk about in today's devotional. At this point, I want to bring on Wayne and invite him into the conversation. Wayne, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. You know, oftentimes when we think about this idea of rejecting the authority of Jesus, we think about pictures just like those religious authorities. You know, people that reject outright the claim of Jesus or ridicule the claim of Jesus. But I'm guessing that those who've joined us on this journey to Easter aren't necessarily wrestling with that type of thing. So it got me wondering if there might be some other more subtle ways that we might struggle with accepting the authority of Jesus or his claim of authority over our lives. What do you think?
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time this morning looking back through the Gospel of Mark, looking for that word authority. Where do we see Jesus' authority expressed throughout the Gospel? And it's a pretty consistent theme throughout the Gospel. Jesus' authority is demonstrated in what Jesus teaches, like Jesus' proclamation of good news, in Jesus' casting out demons and driving out illness. Until this moment that you just mentioned, when Jesus enters the temple and drives out the money changers, drives out the people who were kind of abusing their position in the temple, which got me thinking about the ways that I resist the casting out work that Jesus does, the driving out the parts of us that have distorted the image of God. So simply put, for me, I wonder if I resist Jesus' authority not as a direct, contradicting Jesus' claims about himself, but rather resisting the work that Jesus might do inside me, driving out whatever needs to be driven out.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you're using the casting out, driving out language, because I think what I would usually think about is letting in and not necessarily moving out. So I think that's some really important language, that it's, accepting Jesus in his authority isn't just about letting him in us. It's about what we're allowing him to drive out of us as well.
Yeah, if welcoming Jesus in didn't have any risk of change, of removing anything or altering anything within us, uh, then there is no reason to hesitate to allow Jesus in, right?
Yeah.
The cost of discipleship means that when we welcome Jesus in, we open the door to Jesus's authority to change us.
Yeah, and I guess if we, kind of let him in without making space, so to speak, I guess that's probably that whole I want the benefits, but I don't want to pay the price kind of approach. I want to wear the garments to the wedding feast, but I have no intention of honoring the groom or the host. Kind of thing that goes on in one of Matthew's parables that Matthew shares around this time.
I think it's also worth noticing here, though, that what is a threat for one community who are kind of unwilling to be changed by Jesus's authority is much more frequently throughout the gospel a promise of hope, of liberation, of healing. Like most of the time when Jesus' authority comes on the scene, it's to set people free from oppression and possession or to set them free from sickness or death. Uh, and so there's a warning here. There's this conflict, this example of what it looks like to resist Jesus' authority. But as a whole, the gospel is inviting us to embrace not just the benefits that come with receiving Jesus, but the actual transformation that comes only because of Jesus'
Hmm.
authority. Uh, so yeah, I'm curious for you as you think about uh, recognizing Jesus' authority. What I guess what does that offer? What does that extend to us? What gives you hope about acknowledging who Jesus is and receiving him for who he is?
Yeah, I think we could talk a long time about this, and this is where I would encourage our listeners to really do some reflecting after you're done watching or listening to this conversation. But one of the things that came to my mind very quickly is how when I recognize and submit to the authority of Jesus, that really connects me with other people who are also recognizing and submitting and living under the authority of Jesus. That may be in a setting where we're in the same local church, or that could be in us joining together with others in ministry and service to our communities, or it could be this whole time of COVID has gotten us more comfortable with technology, and I know that there are several people who are in Bible studies with other Christians who aren't necessarily local to them, and so they're enjoying those connections with others who are also living under the authority of Jesus. So there's so many different ways that we receive blessing from those connections. But just the idea of being connected to others who are also surrendering and living under his authority is really powerful to me, I think.
Yeah, another, I guess, hopeful message of receiving Jesus and Jesus's authority comes out of, I think, that same temple experience when Jesus is driving out the money changers from the temple. I can see how that is a threat and a challenge and an uncomfortable moment for some, but for many other people, the people who were on the wrong end of that unjust system, for those who longed for a better way, uh, they must have received Jesus's presence and Jesus's authority as such a gift, in contrast to the other authorities. Uh, they already had authorities, they already had people lording over them. Here was a different sort of lord that was driving out those who were taking advantage of them and kind of welcoming them into God's house anew. And same with all of those people Jesus healed and all of those people who were set free from possession and oppression. Uh, for each of them, they had lords already. They had authorities that had made claims on their lives. And here was a different sort of lord making a different sort of claim, a claim that set them free, and a new community, like you were just saying, to be invited into. They were set free not just for an isolated life, but for life together with Jesus and with Jesus's people.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's good. There's another contrast that came to mind while you were kind of talking, and that if you look at the religious leaders, one of the things that really motivated a lot of their actions throughout these texts is fear. So they wanted to kill Jesus, but they were afraid of the crowd. That comes up multiple times, both back in the section in chapters 2 and 3, where Mark is talking about the conflict between Jesus and the religious authorities, and then it pops up again here in this section of Mark, where he lays out these stories of conflict, and it really gets me to think about how resisting the authority of Jesus, or not necessarily acknowledging it, living under it, does make me much more susceptible to fear. Whereas if I'm submitting and acknowledging to the authority of Jesus, I don't have to live by or be bound by fear, and I don't have to live that way. And I just know in my own life that when my routine gets upset, or when I lose control, or when I'm living in uncertainty, that's when I really, really struggle with fear. And that's when I really need to be reminded of the authority of Jesus, because I keep scrambling around trying to take back control and get things back into a safer spot, But when I'm really aware of and conscious of the authority of Jesus, then I don't have to succumb to that fear, because I can trust that he's in control not only of my life, but this whole story that we're a part of. And yet when I resist that, what's left but fear? Fear that everything that I'm trying to grab onto is going to get upset and is going to be taken away from me. But under the authority of Jesus, I don't have to live that way. I don't have to be shackled by that fear and overrun by that fear.
Yeah, I wonder if that actually is kind of the dividing line between those in the gospel who receive Jesus' authority as a gift and a freedom, and those who see it as a threat. Is those who receive it as a threat are the ones who imagine themselves to be the ultimate authorities of their own lives and the lives of people around them. And for those who see themselves as the authority, as the lords, even if it's just in with one small pocket of the community, then any other authority, any other lord, sparks fear, creates a new fear, acknowledging what's always been true, that they're not actually the ultimate authority. Uh, for everybody else who is living in the fear of whatever else is going on, uh, receiving Jesus as Lord is a gift of, it's a liberation from the thing that is creating fear for them. So this sickness no longer is the Lord of them. They're set free from the fear of what's going on in their bodies, or what's going on in their society or community, or you know what's going on in their spirit and their soul. So Jesus's authority for them is a freedom from fear. Uh, I guess the same would be true, and eventually for some of them ends up being true of these same religious leaders who oppose Jesus and resist Jesus. The Pharisees here aren't hopeless. Like they are tangled up in a dominating sort of lie, the same way that people longing for healing are tied up in sickness, and longing for freedom from oppression are tangled up by these demonic powers. Uh, there is a sort of exorcism waiting to happen for them as well, being set free of that, uh, being set free of their fear of not being in control. Uh, Instead of clinging to that control, Jesus offers them the opportunity to relinquish that. Uh, the question is whether or not they will.
Yeah, I just think this is such an important conversation, because so much of the conversation that we have around the authority of Jesus is really about that first question we were talking about. It's about what you have to give up and what it demands. And there's certainly demands that the authority of Jesus makes on our lives, but what we experience as a result of acknowledging his authority over us and our churches and our world, that's just a conversation I don't think we have enough, because it really is. I think it's important, and it is really enlightening. Just in the few minutes that we've had to talk about it here, I've been encouraged.
Yeah, I have really appreciated this conversation as well. I'm really glad you invited me to be part of it because it has me thinking not just about the ways that I might be resistant to the authority of Jesus, the ways that I might be hesitant to acknowledge and embrace the lordship of Jesus in my own life because of my own fear-based anxiety about relinquishing control, but it also is turning my attention to that more hopeful promise that as we invite Jesus in as the authority, as the Lord, we welcome that healing and freedom, that transformation that Jesus brings. So I guess that's probably a good place for us to wrap this up, right? Is with that invitation, an invitation for each of us to consider in what ways might embracing or acknowledging the authority of Jesus transform our lives? In what ways are we resistant to that change, resistant to Jesus's authority? And in what ways might God be longing to heal and restore and liberate us if only we join in the confession that many of us have made a number of times throughout our lives in new and unique ways, even now, even in these weeks leading up to Easter, to say with all of God's people that Jesus is Lord.